delighted to welcome you at Homerton College to this event, which is breaking the silence about uterine fibroids, confronting the inequalities in women's health. So today we have a series of talks from researchers, clinicians, politicians, and also activists on fibroids. So this is really exciting, and I would like to thank all the people who actually have agreed to contribute to the talks, but also the panelists for agreeing to contribute to this event. But also I just want to highlight that we want this event to be interactive and exciting. So we are encouraging everybody to contribute to this event whenever possible, whenever necessary. So, yep. But first of all, I just want also to announce for housekeeping. So today there are no planned fire tests. So if you hear a fire alarm, this is real. So you can get out of the hall through the door here, and also at the back to the lawn there. So you have to be away from the building, and it shows that actually there is a fire assembly point. But also you will see in your program that we'll be in the breakout rooms as well. So we'll be in the Alison Shrubsole room and also the Parson Brown room. When you're in that room and you hear a fire alarm, you can exit through the door on the right side, down the staircase, which is a metal staircase, down outside to the lawn, away from the building. Likewise, for the Alison Shrubsole room, you can exit through the door on the right, down the staircase, and outside to the lawn. But also, I want to point out that we have a non-smoking policy. So if you need to smoke, please go to the car park right at the back. So go to the car park right at the back. And as I've said, that we also going to be in the breakout rooms, which is the Alison Shrubsole room and the Parson Brown room. So currently, if you're on the right, you'll be going to the Alison Shrubsole room, and if you're on the left, you'll be going to the Parson Brown room. Finally, I'd like to invite Lord Simon Woolley to the stage to open this event. So Lord Simon Woolley is a director and the founder of Operation Black Vote, but also he's a peer in the House of Lords, and but also he's a trustee for the charity Police Now. But obviously we know Lord Simon because also he's the principal of Homerton College. So Lord Simon, please.
Thank you, Priscilla, and welcome to you all. We gather, we come together in Homerton's great hall. And Priscilla, what a wonderful place to be holding this groundbreaking, you should know, this groundbreaking conversation that you and your colleagues have curated for us today. You all should know that 3 years, 1 month, 25 days, and 4 hours, I was inducted as the principal of Homerton College. And I reminded the fellows, we have a number of them here today, that you have selected and elected an activist. And being an activist, that I cannot not be active in a way that seeks to move the dial, to make that transformative change in politics, in education, in society in general. And I think over the last 3 years, Frankie, my deputy vice principal here, that Homerton College has become a beacon in Cambridge, a beacon across the country, in fact, a beacon around the world for a college that prides itself on diversity and inclusion, but also prides itself on speaking to global issues like this one. And Priscilla came to me in my office with her colleagues and talked about the racial inequities in health, and particularly this issue. So I said to Priscilla, Jemima, Francesca, Julia, and Jasmine. Where are you, by the way? Can you all please stand up? Can you please stand up? Please stand up. I want to embarrass them for a second. Jasmine, come in. So they came to me, knocked on my door, and said, Simon, we've got this big idea about having a conference. So I said to them, please remain standing up. I said to them, you know the Homerton mantra, don't you? And Priscilla said, what's that? I said, go big or go home. And you've gone big. You've gone big. This is what we do. You have an issue that needs to be raised. You want the medical profession across the board to listen, to acknowledge, and to change. This place, this college, is a beacon for that. Can you give them all a round of applause, please? Thank you. Thank you. Priscilla, this is not the end of the conversation. This is the start of an important conversation. Many of you will have seen the news about 4 years ago when the campaign group, Mothers and Babies, Reducing Risk through confidential inquiries and something else, highlighted the fact that black women were 5 times more likely to die in childbirth and just after. And it made national news. What Priscilla and her team have done is taken that conversation to the next level and highlighted specific around uterine fibroids. And what her and her team have done is brought the experts here. And we've got some wonderful people, one I want to call out in a moment. But they've brought the experts here to, 1, acknowledge the problem, to 2, for us all to better understand it, and 3, to have a plan to effectively deal with it. We cannot have this data that is laid bare by Priscilla and her team, which affects many women, by the way, but disproportionately women of color. So whilst you're here under this roof, you become activists. You become change makers. You become the voice and the conscience for women out there to be heard, to be listened to have a plan that can deal with the inequities in this space. And I've looked at some of your people that you've got here today. One in particular I haven't seen for some time. As a matter of fact, I think that we go back, I think, nearly 20 years, it might be, and I'm so pleased to see my friend, Professor Dame Elizabeth Anyonwu. Can you please stand up? Yes, please stand up. Please stand up. Dame Elizabeth has many things. That she's broke through so many barriers, started off as a nurse, become a voice in campaigning against racial inequities, went through the history books and championed Mary Seacole as a beacon of light in the nursing profession. And then she called me up one day, she said, Simon, and I said, yes, Elizabeth, what can I do to help you? She said, the Secretary of Education, Michael Gove, is trying to take Mary Seacole off the curriculum. Help. So I said, what can we do? She said, shout about it. And we did. And after a campaign of about 3 months, where we got 40,000 signatories, Michael Gove's office said, we're done. We give up. We give up. Because of our campaign, Mary Seacole stayed on the curriculum as a beacon of the Black experience in nursing. So I am convinced, I know today you're going to have a great conference. Worry this subject like a dog worries a bone. Have a plan from A to B to success. And I promise you that this college, under my watch, will sing from the rooftops about what needs to be done far and wide. Have a wonderful conference. Thank you all very much.
Okay. Welcome everybody again, and thank you very much for coming. For our next speaker, I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Francesca Mo, who is a feminist geographer and the vice principal at Homerton College. Broadly speaking, Francesca's work explores the relationship between past and present through the lens of gender. And her talk today, Women's Health, Historical and Political Approaches, will help us place fibroids in their broader historical and political context in which they exist as a gynecological condition. Francesca. All right, here we go.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. What an absolute pleasure it is to spend the afternoon with you. My name's Francesca. I'm the vice principal. I'm also a geographer, and I want to say thank you, first of all, for the invitation to talk about my research. Homerton is an amazing college, and as Lord Woolley has said, it's a place that we believe very strongly in opening the door of research, to open the door to our college, to bring together a diverse set of experts, patient advocates, clinicians, lawyers, academics, to talk about really important issues. So it is a total pleasure and an absolute privilege to take you through a little bit of my world as a researcher working on women's health issues, and to think about some of the intersections between the work that I do and the work of people in the room. So I'm a technologist of power. And actually, Lord Woolley and I have a lot of really interesting conversations. I work on the theoretics of power. You're an activist, aren't you? So we think about lots of things to do with resistance, human rights, and inequality. So let me take you through some of the things that I'm thinking about at the moment in my own research. So as a technologist of power, I'm interested in forms of knowledge predominantly, forms of expertise and ideas. But what anchors my work is scale. It's very geographical in the sense that I'm focused on the body. And most recently, geographers have, probably in the last 15 years, discovered the body. And Alison Mounce's work tells us that what the body demands is interdisciplinary research and theory that helps us understand issues. Issues as wide-ranging as physicality, sexuality, subjectivity, emotion, and affect, and it's ontological or legal status. And what I'd include here also is health. So this interdisciplinary gathering today is so important for us to draw together those different realms of expertise. So in my own work, in my teaching, I look a lot at feminists, queer, post-structural and post-colonial scholars and critical race theorists, and how they see the body as a site of power, and how you can read forms of expertise on the body, in the body, and in its experiences. And so in my own work, in my writing, I've paid a lot of attention to systems of knowledge like medicine and the way in which they're deployed at particular points in time, particularly in my work at the start of the 20th century. I'm very interested in the way in which bodies are constructed as spaces through an array of expert knowledges, and how, in particular, they're subject to forms of social regulation around social norm, to do with gender culture, particularly in relation to the way that women are supposed to behave, and also the way in which that can be racialized. So I also think a little bit about, sorry, I'm struggling to move them on here. There we go. Think a little bit about the different forms of power and how they visit the body. And I've been thinking more recently about the clinical gaze and how it's not restricted, as the quote says here, to the body's interior, but claims of knowledge about the body extend into knowledge claims about the role of individuals in society. And so I've been thinking about those questions about how people fit in society, who is in the population, what is it made up of? And in my work, my very early work actually as a graduate student, working on bodies and regulation, and particularly access to reproductive healthcare, I was absolutely struck by Anne Oakley, the sociologist's work on the captured womb. And I always say to my graduate students now that you should have a shelf of things, books that are good to think with. And this is one of my favorites, and this afternoon I'll take you through some of my other favorites that are good to think with. Anne Oakley's written extensively, I'm sure many of you know her work, about women and power and forms of expertise. And as a graduate student, this book really, really captured my attention, because from a feminist perspective, so from the perspective of women, she saw medicine as a technology of power that actually constructed gender identity in society. And she was very critical of Western medicine's progressive medicalization of childbirth in particular, and famously wrote that medicine could evacuate women from the experience of giving birth. So as a young technologist of power, I was fascinated in that relationship between knowledge and the body, and I grew increasingly interested in the early 20th century as an important time for this creation of a social and cultural ideal around white middle-class women as mothers of the nation, and how central that was for Britain as a colonial power. So I think many of these forms of knowledge are really relevant, because they, in my own work on the relationship between the past and the present, they don't disappear, they recombine in new ways in the present. And some of you will know Anne-Laura Stoller's work about imperial duress, the way in which these types of identities keep coming back. In fact, they never lose their power. The other book on my bookshelf of things that are really good to think with is Dorothy Roberts' Killing the Black Body. And this is super interesting to technologists of power like me, because it asks academics to think differently about the how, about the methodology that we use and what underpins our work. And in part, for me, it's been a really exciting time in my career to work with Lord Woolley and think about social justice and how that underpins the work that I do as an academic, and think more about my identity as a scholar activist and how I can use my academic work to think about power in society and not just within the confines of the ivory tower. So for me, Killing the Black Body has been so important, because it creates a new cross-disciplinary feminist framework to think about reproductive rights and social justice. And it stems from the work of Black women and women of color and feminists in the early 1990s in the US, thinking about human rights, intersectionality, the way in which class, race, sexuality interweave in forms of inequality. And it positions sexual and reproductive health as so political. And in my work with my students, we look at that scalar relationship between the individual body and society, the role of the individual in society, the positioning of the individual in society. And so this new activist work is really beginning to think about how women in socially marginalized groups can be oppressed, and that can be seen in the way in which they access healthcare. So intersectionality is a really new and important underpinning for scholar activist work, thinking about those links between forms of oppression. And in my work studying sort of bodies of knowledge and forms of expertise, it takes me into medical journals, which is absolutely fascinating. And I've been really interested recently to look through the medical press and see the ways in which women's health is discussed in the medical press, and see some of the themes that I work on reflected in these articles. And it's been absolutely fascinating for me to think about the role of the academic. So I'm not medically qualified, but I'm very interested in medicine and allied disciplines as forms of expertise. And in the Lancet in the summer, the editorial suggested that scholarship and advocacy make clear the need to expand our understanding of women's health beyond the reproductive role, and think about how that can be used to enhance women's well-being for the long term. And of course, thinking about that reproductive role, that's where I began my career, thinking about the point in history where women were seen as the mothers of the nation in the UK, and expanding out beyond that, what that might mean for our work on reproductive health. So I'm very much enjoying this interdisciplinary conversation. And I'm sure many of you have seen this next slide, but I was really excited to see, as a non-clinician, it's really excited to see this, which is, my other half is a medic. So this came through our letterbox just the other day in the BMJ, the role of endometriosis and uterine fibroids and the risk of premature mortality, thinking again about that whole life course, and the importance of women's health. So I think for me as a researcher, one of the most important things I'm learning is that the combination of the scholar activist and the technologists of power with this specialist medical scientific literature is really important, and it's really exciting. And I think it's one of the most interesting things that I have worked on. And I've greatly enjoyed looking at this literature and thinking about how some of the fundamentals of my work to do with resistance and visibility, and how inequality is produced and maintained in certain political systems, how that can be read through and understood with a new form of literature. So I'm going to leave it there, but just to say, once again, welcome to our college, and thank you very much for being part of this interdisciplinary conversation. And it really is an absolute pleasure to spend the afternoon with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have you got any quick question for Francesca? All right, thank you very much. I'd like to have Francesca Gaccioli to introduce our next speaker.
Our keynote speaker today is Professor Hirali Critchley. She is Professor of Reproductive Medicine at the University of Edinburgh and a consultant gynecologist. Her research focuses on endometrium pathophysiology, menstruation and abnormal uterine bleeding, embryo implantation, and early pregnancy loss. She has published more than 200 peer-reviewed papers and received many accolades from the international research community. And this is a testimony to her important contribution to the field. Today, she will talk about the health impacts of uterine fibroids. Thank you, Professor Critchley.
So, well, it's just wonderful to be in a room where we have a challenge set by Lord Woolley. We've listened to Francesca talk about the importance of interdiscipline conversations and opportunities. And so a huge thank you to the organisers for allowing me to share with you some thoughts. And I do come from a background as being a clinician, as being a scientist. And so what I want to talk about is fibroids. So let's talk about fibroids, but particularly think about their broader health impacts. These are some disclosures, which as clinician scientists, we always share. And what I'd like to start with is some facts, and I'll go through these with you, and I'll just preface it by saying that I will use the terms woman and women, but recognise that abnormal uterine bleeding, because that's what I want to talk about, can affect all assigned female at birth, not only those who identify as women. So some important facts are that uterine fibroids affect more than 70% of women worldwide, and particularly women of colour, and the clinical symptoms will present in at least 1 in 2, that's half of those affected. Fibroids are benign, they're smooth muscle tumours, and by that we mean that there are thickenings in the cells in the muscle of the wall of the womb. The symptoms associated are really those of heavy menstrual bleeding. So this is something we don't like talking about, as well as, of course, symptoms of pressure and pain. And the impacts of heavy menstrual bleeding are an unrecognised risk of iron deficiency and anemia. And so fibroids will have a massive impact on the quality of life of those affected. And what is most concerning is that many with symptomatic fibroids live with this condition chronically without actually seeking care. I'll share some data that show that fibroids impact pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes, and Francesca drew our attention to a very recent publication on that topic. But if we think about the wider impacts on society, the economic cost of being absent from work because of heavy periods, alongside fibroids, and there may also be conditions such as endometriosis and ovarian cysts, that in a publication from the NHS Confederation just last month, this is a figure of some £11 billion per annum. So this is not trivial. And those are UK figures, and if we look across the Atlantic at the USA, then the figures there show that this is a public health concern, accounting for more than $34 billion in annual treatment-related costs. So just remember that burden. As a clinician scientist, and I'm not here to talk about these in detail, but I hope you can see the slide at the back, there are risk factors, and these include issues such as race, body mass index, age, endocrine disruptors, vitamin D deficiencies, and numbers of pregnancy, and then underpinning the difference between, I don't know whether the point is working here, this muscle of the wall of the womb where a fibroid may not develop to the muscle in the wall of the womb where a fibroid would develop, are a host of underpinning mechanistic factors, which if we're going to move to personalised medicine and refine our approaches, just as comparatively equivalent diseases with same burden are receiving attention, but this is not receiving attention in the area we're discussing today, are underpinning genetics, epigenetics, and other factors. And those would be the topic of another talk. But what I want to focus on is the way we normalize symptoms. And for those who have fibroids, this limited knowledge, the little understanding of some about what is not normal and normal menstruation means that those who suffer with these symptoms do not seek treatment, and others who know their symptoms are out with the normal range just avoid the problem. And so when we talk about education, we need a better patient-centered approach, and we need an improved education on the knowledge about fibroids and the symptoms associated. Because there are adverse impacts of the heavy bleeding associated with fibroids. It affects those in the prime years of their lives. This is equivalent to a lifetime loss of 5 to 7 years of healthy life. And these impacts are not only experienced by the individual themselves, but on their careers, their families, and indirectly on society. So one of the reasons these conditions do not receive attention is because they're not perceived as life-threatening, and even that could be open to discussion, but they are certainly life-altering. So this figure is 1 in 3. These are women of reproductive age who experience abnormal bleeding, one of the commonest symptoms associated with uterine fibroids. But in reality, heavy bleeding may affect as many as 1 in 2. And if an individual, often with fibroids, has heavy bleeding, 1 in 3 have previously resorted to having their uterus removed. And we are not taking cognizance of the impacts on mental health, the feeling of social isolation, physical health, which I'll come to in a bit more detail, fertility goals, and I've already shared some data on socioeconomic impacts. And if we look at data from across Europe, 5 Western countries, at the impact of heavy bleeding, because it is heavy bleeding that is the symptom experienced by those of fibroids, as many as 45% will have this complaint. An internet survey of over 40,000 women showed that at least half experienced this symptom. And when we look again at the productivity loss due to these symptoms of heavy bleeding experienced by so many with fibroids, then 13% will be absent, and this important figure of 80% presenteeism. So that means the individual is at work, but they are not working to their full capacity. And this was again picked up in the report just last month from the NHS Confederation, showing that poor menstrual health, including heavy periods, has an economic impact in the UK of 8.7 billion. This includes figures for absenteeism and presenteeism, and the absenteeism due to heavy periods costs us 4.7 billion annually. Now, if those figures were heard in any other clinical field, action would be being taken. So, to try and help move this field forward, and it is disappointing that the start of this long winding road is 20 years ago. So we tried within FIGO, so that's the International Federation of Gynecology and Obstetrics, to address this problem of abnormal uterine bleeding, heavy bleeding, that is a symptom of so many who complain of fibroids. And last autumn, we're able to present the risks of iron deficiency impact across the life course. And I think Francesca mentioned the importance of recognizing how a condition can have a symptom that can impact not just on the individual, but move forward highlight fibroids as a structural cause within that, phenotyping and classification is these 2 FIGO systems. One of which describes the discussion experience itself, so the frequency, duration, volume, regularity of menstrual bleeding, but importantly, with this acronym palm coin, so if you think of a coin on your palm, where the palm stands for structural causes, with the L representing the fibroid, and on the right-hand side, or at least my right-hand side, the non-structural causes, because you may have fibroids, but you may also have other factors that contribute to your bleeding. And because I know we're a diverse audience here, I share now an image of the uterus with at the top the L circled. So that is a fibroid within the muscle of the womb, and that is a major cause of abdominal bleeding. But there may be other structural features. We're not here to talk about another cause of very heavy, painful bleeding known as adenomyosis, but often with fibroids will have other factors as well that give them heavy bleeding. And the E that's circled is meant to share with you all that when you bleed and you have fibroids, the bleeding is coming from the lining of the womb. It is not the fibroid that is bleeding, it is the lining of the womb that is the source of bleeding, and that needs to be understood. And of course, fibroids can be present in all sorts of shapes and locations and numbers. And if you look at those yellow circles numbered 1 to 8, it shows you that sometimes fibroids may be near the center of the cavity of the womb, and sometimes they'll be in the muscle around it. And in terms of how we define treatment and we begin to personalize treatments, this can become important, because we know from mechanism of action studies, and I don't wish you to necessarily be overly concerned about what each of those colored bars shows, but what it's meant to represent is that even though a fibroid may be there in the wall of the womb, it may or may not be affecting the function of the lining of the womb itself. And this is absolutely an area where more research is needed. And I've reproduced that same image, and I've done a circle in red around the ones near the womb lining itself, and then the numbers 4 and above are those that are away from the lining of the womb. And so as doctors in the clinics, we have to remember that we don't just have a siloed approach to our patients, that we have to consider other factors that may be contributing to the bleeding experience, such as being born with a tendency to have heavier bleeding, or perhaps it may be reflecting the hormonal function of the ovaries. But in terms of the day-to-day management, what we're treating so often at the moment is the one-size-fits-all symptom-based approach. And what we need to understand is a more nuanced, bespoke form of management, so our patients don't go through what I call a shopping list of options, be incredibly disappointed, and end up with a path of no resort, which sometimes takes them to an action that they cannot reverse, such as losing their womb. Now, that may be important for some, but not if you're at the beginning of your perhaps fertility desires, or you may just be an individual who doesn't want surgery and doesn't want to lose their womb. So huge areas of research gaps. And for those that would be interested in, well, what is the fibroid itself doing to act on the lining of the womb to create this horrendous symptom of bleeding, then we have all sorts of areas of inquiry, such as the chemical messengers the fibroid itself produces, the growth factors, how it changes the muscle of the womb. And I smiled at somebody in the audience because I do have the microbiome mentioned too. And I think we have so much that we need to understand. And at the end of the day, we have to come back to this question, is that on the, well, it would be your left from the audience, you'll see that when we have heavy bleeding, we know there are disturbances in this complex tissue, the lining of the womb. But if you look on the other side, you'll see the fibroid, if I can show it to you, the ball in the center of that vertical pink column is meant to represent the fibroid. And you'll see I've got a list of 4 question marks. All of those are research gaps. Was the lining of the womb ever always going to bleed heavily, or is there something about that fibroid being present that is sending a message to talk to the lining of the womb? And each of those have to be answered if we're going to get better at whether it's early diagnosis so we can begin to be preventative, or if we know there is a problem, how can we be better focused in our treatment approaches? So I need to move on and say a few words about pregnancy outcomes, reminding you just how common fibroids are. 70% at least of reproductive age women, and of those who have fibroids and are pregnant, over 12% of those who are pregnant will have fibroids. These are associated, and I look to my obstetric colleagues in the audience, with adverse obstetric outcomes during pregnancy, during labour, and particularly after delivery. And jumping to the bottom bullet point, postpartum hemorrhage is the major cause of maternal death across the world. And if you are anemic, when you have your postpartum hemorrhage, you are more likely to die than if you are not anemic. And if we can treat anemia before our patients even become pregnant, we may be able to impact on the lives of women across the globe. The BMJ article mentioned by Francesca shows how fibroids are associated with preterm delivery and growth restriction. But I want to return to anemia because I think this is where we can have an impact. 30% of women of reproductive age are anemic. You look at low and middle income countries where, of course, there are some of the greatest disparities in healthcare. As many as 60% of women may be anemic. And one of the biggest causes of anemia, probably in those countries, is not just the diet, but the recognition of periods, heavy periods, and of course those with fibroids are the ones who have some of the heaviest periods. We have iron deficiency presenting long before anemia, and menstruation has been completely overlooked across the world as a cause of anemia, and WHO is not reaching its goal of reducing anemia by 50% by 2025. In our FIGO statement just last year, we call out the need to recognize iron deficiency and anemia in women and girls. I'll run through these quickly. We must stop normalizing these symptoms. Hemoglobin is insensitive as an assessment, and we need to think about this as a health impact before pregnancy. Treat iron deficiency and heavy bleeding, and we will make those with heavy bleeding, many who have fibroids, enter pregnancy and perhaps impact their outcomes. Where I show a QR code for anybody who is interested, if you shine your phone at it, it takes you directly to the publication. So we need to stop bleeding, fill up the tank. This is a sort of paradigm, because if your iron intake equals your iron loss at menstruation, you won't get anemia. But as soon as your menstrual blood loss becomes heavier, your iron loss becomes heavier, and you become anemic. And so what we have to do when we're thinking about managing fibroids is we have to understand the symptom. We have systems to help us do that. We have to stop the bleeding, treat the cause, and replace iron. And it's very interesting that in WH's report now, recognizing they're not going to meet their goals, they have to address the physiology of decreased blood loss, and they have to tackle the causes of anemia. And that means looking at gynecology and obstetric conditions, including abnormal uterine bleeding. And for those interested on this life course impact, that long winding road in the middle shows you that if you bleed heavily, you may be iron deficient, you'll have all these non-pregnant manifestations, and we're here talking about fibroids. Fibroids are one of the commonest causes of heavy bleeding. There are impacts on pregnancy, and again, the topic of another conversation, this affects the fetus, and it may also affect the neurodevelopment of the infant. So if we identify fibroids, identify those at risk of heavy bleeding, manage their risk of iron deficiency and anemia, allow them to enter pregnancy in a much better state of health, we may have not only better outcomes for the individual with fibroids, but also for their infants. And that QR code just takes you to a series of evidence and documentation on that life course impact. So why is research and development of tools to answer clinical questions in gynecology so important? Well, it's because so many women in their lifetime see a gynecologist for one or more endometrial-related health problems with impact on their quality of life. And the lining of the womb is understudied relative to the healthcare burden of endometrial-related disorders. And here I talk about the burden of menstrual bleeding and particularly fibroid-related bleeding. And because these are two taboo areas, nobody wants to talk about them. People are much happier to talk about pain. They are not happy to talk about bleeding. And it is hard to believe that in a life course of 40 years in my own profession, this was an issue 40 years ago, it was an issue 20 years ago, and it's unbelievable, it is still an issue today. So we have to talk about what it is that our patients are complaining of. So I end with a couple of slides. This was a conversation I had with, it was a US colleague, founder of the Fibroid Foundation there, really committed to uterine fibroid advocacy and raising this health concern that 26 million women in the US and 1 million more globally experience, and this need to stop normalizing menstruation and to talk about periods and address cultural taboos and social norms. Reframe our messaging on menstruation, see it as a normal process, and try and reduce the burden menstrual stigma places on women and girls. So my take-home messages are, number one, uterine fibroids are a public health concern. And I think if as an outcome of our discussions and conversations today, we can make that more visible, that will be a great achievement. And to do this, we have to tackle the taboo around menstruation, stop normalizing what is a physiological process, recognize the burden placed on those who experience heavy bleeding. Remember how many it affects, 1 in 3, that is a big number. Recognize that those with fibroids live with this condition chronically, but don't seek the care they should be receiving. Understand better this under-recognized cause of iron deficiency and anemia with life course impacts. And to do this, we have to really have patient-centered education to improve knowledge of fibroids and symptoms associated. And in our research and development, we have the opportunity to make advances, particularly, and Francesca raised about working cross-discipline, cross-sector, because we have amazing new technologies that we can apply to endometrial physiology and uterine fibroid research and advanced menstruation science, advanced fibroid science. So I thank you for your attention. If there's time, I'm happy to take questions. And the picture I leave you with, I live and work in Edinburgh, and these are 3 amazing engineering achievements across 3 centuries. The red is the rail bridge from the 19th century. The middle one is the road bridge from the 20th century. And the one on, well, it would be your far left, my right, is the Queensferry crossing from the 21st century. But I show them because they're bridges. And again, it's this message of we're an interdisciplinary cross-sector audience, but what an opportunity to have a diverse conversation that means so much to so many who suffer with fibroids, and the silence has been there far too long, and we need to break it. So again, I look at Lord Woolley for supporting our discussions this afternoon, Francesca, Priscilla, and everybody else in the team for organising this. And I certainly look forward to a great conversation, but this is just a beginning, because we have to now, we've got the facts and the figures, we have an opportunity, and that gauntlet you threw out to us, we need to rise to that. So thank you all.
Any questions for Hilary?
Thank you so much, Hilary. It's not really a question, just, I guess, something else to add to what you said, because I think it's really, really important. My name is Roberta Hook. I'm the Deputy Chief Operating Officer at the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital. I think the other thing that supplements this is the fact that women's health is costed and valued less according to the NHS. So when you look at a consultant-led outpatient service, if you come for respiratory medicine, 2022-2023 that pay you £102, for diabetes that pay you £108, for infectious disease that pay you £158, for hepatology that pay you £157, for gynecology they pay you £80. So when you then look at the gynecological services and the fact that women's health has such a long waiting list, it's because of how it's also valued. When you come to A&E as a woman with period pains and heavy bleeding, there is low treatment options and it doesn't need scanning. So therefore they pay you £87. It doesn't need surgery, it doesn't need an MRI, it doesn't need X-ray. So they quickly bundle you and out you go. And actually the only other treatment that got £87 is if a patient arrives dead on arrival. So when you look at the value that the healthcare system in this country puts on women's services, that's one of the reasons also that we also need to amplify this message that can't be the case. Because if I am, as the Deputy Chief Operating Officer, the Chief Operating Officer, going to look at my operational planning and think about what I'm going to prioritize in this financial climate, I'm going to look at the high value and high cost, and gynecological services doesn't hit that.
So thank you very, very much. And I mean, I think those are figures that you should share more widely. I think they are really impactful. There's no doubt that in the pandemic, because so many of these disorders of heavy bleeding, pain, which of course includes those with fibroids, have previously been termed benign, they are again minimized. So all those patients suddenly became of lesser importance, and we have to stop using that terminology, because these are, as I said earlier, these are life-altering conditions and they have to be raised in importance. And I think some of the economic data may help us. And of course, the RCOG, Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, just very recently released its data on waiting lists, which have gone up over 400%. I think quite an interesting capture of the size of the waiting lists have been given in the number of miles between different cities, how many times you can fill Wembley Stadium. The waiting lists are huge, and we have got to address this, and I think the example you gave of how women's health is not prioritised is quite shocking. So thank you for that very important addition.
Okay, thank you. We'll continue the discussion during the breakout rooms and the panel. All right, so our next speaker is joining us remotely, and our colleague Jemima is going to introduce her.
Thank you. It's been an insightful conference so far. Our next speaker is joining us from the US, therefore she'll be joining us online. She is Erica L. Taylor, and she is a filmmaker and producer known for her impactful work on issues affecting underrepresented communities, particularly in women's health. Her latest documentary, which is Red Alert, The Fight Against Fibroids, which she will be showcasing today, explores the often overlooked topic of uterine fibroids. Inspired by her own experiences with fibroids and reproductive health challenges, Taylor uses the film to spotlight the pain, complications, and lack of awareness around fibroids, which frequently leads to unnecessary surgeries and also health complications. With a background in media communication, Taylor has worked on several projects, for example, Unsung and Unsung Hollywood, and also Invisible Vegan. Now serving as the national brand ambassador for the Fibroids Fighters Foundation, she actively promotes awareness and advocates for accessible fibroid treatments through public speaking and multimedia projects. Her commitment to storytelling is further reflected in her leadership role, such as her current position serving as the newly elected president of the Documentary Producers Alliance, where she focuses on equity and inclusion. Through Red Alert, she aims to not only raise awareness, but also inspire policy changes that supports better healthcare options for women suffering from fibroids. I hope she is online now.
Hello.
Minute.
Hello.
Oh, hi, Erika. Thank you for joining.
Hello. Thank you very much
Now,
for
she'll
having me.
firstly display some clips from her documentary and we'll have a short interview session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jemima. It's a pleasure to actually see you after all this time. I hope you all can hear me okay.
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you so much for that confirmation. I'm excited to be here. I got a chance to hear a little bit of the previous presentation, and I was clapping back here in the States, listening to the information that was presented and just connecting with it because of my uterine fibroid experience. I am going to go ahead and get started with showing film clips from my upcoming documentary. The documentary has been in the works for over 5 years now. It's a personal documentary based upon my own experience with uterine fibroids that I have been fighting with since 2008. What you are about to see is a rough cut. It is going to start off with the initial official trailer and then go into some never before seen footage of the film specifically for this audience. And so I look forward to any questions that you all have following this presentation.
Great documentary. It was definitely emotional. I'll just go ahead and ask you a few questions, if that's okay. And I'll give the opportunity also to the audience for at least a question, if we do have some time. Right. So I just wanted to ask, what inspired you to make this documentary and what is the significance of the name Red Alert?
For sure. This is actually my second documentary. I produced a documentary with a production partner of mine entitled The Invisible Vegan, about veganism in the African American community. And as a result of that production, that's why I first introduced my own fibroid story on camera. And I talked about the connection between the symptoms of uterine fibroids and the ingestion of red meat, the hormones in red meat, and how they could exacerbate the symptoms, the heavy bleeding, the cramping, the feeling of heaviness, the anemia, all of that. And so as I talked about that in the film and the film released, women started reaching out to me on social media and saying, me too, I am having that problem as well. I didn't know about that connection. Thank you so much for telling this story. I've been suffering in silence for a very long time. And I got so many of those responses that I was thinking about my next project And I said, it has to be on uterine fibroids. Simultaneously, I was experiencing a lot of issues with my own health. I had suffered from 2 miscarriages within 1 year, even though I've been given a diagnosis of infertility and having a 0.1% chance of conceiving because of my fibroids and because of the surgery that I had endured. I did get pregnant twice in 1 year, but unfortunately, they had resulted in miscarriages. And so, after those experiences and continuously having issues with reoccurring fibroids, I decided that I had to do something about Red Alert. And so, as I continued to talk with other women in my community and talk to my family members, talk to my mother, um, women have been suffering in silence for a very long time. We don't talk about these things, especially in the African American community. We don't talk about period health. We don't talk about the pain that we're experiencing. We just call in sick to work, or we tough it out. We just sit, in the fetal position on the couch in pain. But we don't talk to one another about it, and we don't express our true feelings about what we're dealing with, and we don't talk about um, uh, the accidents that could happen and having to take a change of clothes to work just in case something happens. We don't talk about those things. And so after learning the information about how many women are suffering from uterine fibroids, I felt that I had no choice but to do this documentary film.
All right, thank you for that, and thank you for raising awareness through your documentary. And why is this documentary and the messaging behind it so important at this point in time, especially in the US where you are based, and also to the rest of the world as well?
Absolutely. I feel like this is women's health. It's a critical time for women's health, especially here in the States. We've had ongoing discussions and debates politically about reproductive health. And this is a conversation. Uterine fibroids, reproductive health is something that is not discussed enough. It's underfunded, especially something that is also particularly affecting African American women and African women. And so it's important that we not only open up the discussion, but that we amplify our voices about this issue so that we can continue to get the funding needed for the research and the awareness, to spread the awareness about uterine fibroids throughout the community, have a presence in the communities, especially communities of color, and understand how this disease affects everyone. Here, I know in the States alone, uterine fibroids indirectly cost between $4 and $36 billion a year. This is because people are calling off from work, they're sick. This is because people are having to do invasive surgeries that are very costly. This is because hysterectomies are performed more often on women with uterine fibroids. Over 500,000 hysterectomies are performed every year in the United States alone. That are fibroid-related hysterectomies. So the costs continue to increase. The individual and the healthcare system and our system overall. And this is a worldwide problem. Over 171 million women suffer from uterine fibroids. So if there was ever a time for us to take funding and research and attention towards this disease, it is definitely now. And I also wanted to revisit your question earlier about why I chose Red Alert. It's just one of those things that spiritually came to me in the middle of the night as I decided to do this documentary film. I literally woke up and sat up in bed and told my husband, I know the name of this documentary. It's going to be Red Alert. Red Alert is typically the response for emergencies. And this, to me and to other women who are suffering, this is an emergency. This is affecting our lives every single day. And it deserves the attention of all of the other issues, medical issues that are prioritized over uterine fibroids and reproductive health. We often say, among myself and my other colleagues, that things like erectile dysfunction and reproductive health when it comes to contraception are given much more attention and much more funding, much more commercialization than uterine fibroids, which is deeply affecting women every single day.
Thank you. And I do hope by the time we all leave here, we leave with red alerts. And I would say, as an impact producer, what do you think differentiates you from a general documentary filmmaker? And what are some of the challenges that you faced during your documentary? And lastly, how can we help as an audience to tackle these challenges?
Thank you, Jemima, for asking that question. I am an impact producer in the sense that the effort to spread awareness about this issue doesn't stop with the documentary film. I have moved further than that in trying to make an impact in the community by becoming an ambassador for the USA Fibroid Centers and the Fibroid Fighters Foundation, by also building my own effort and philanthropy effort and advocacy effort called the Red Alert Project, where I try to reach out to community health organizations and educate women myself based upon the research that I've learned as I am still in production of this documentary film. There's very little information that is spread out to the average person about uterine fibroids. A lot of that information really is still being held in the research labs and offices, the doctor's offices. And if you don't know to ask the right questions, then you don't know. And so being an impact producer, I, have held fibroid summits. So 2 years ago, we started an online virtual summit called Red Alert, a conversation about women's health. And it was a phenomenal 2-hour summit where we discussed fibroids with researchers and physicians. We got the American Heart Association involved because, as I believe the previous speaker mentioned, anemia is a very serious side effect of uterine fibroids. And so when you talk about anemia and bleeding heavily for long periods of time, you're looking at that affecting your heart, and you're looking at that affecting other systems, health systems. And so we wanted to have that holistic conversation about how uterine fibroids affects women overall. So during the summit, we spoke with physicians, we spoke with other fibroid survivors and sufferers. We spoke with a chef, a vegan chef out of Belize, who specializes in cooking for fibroid health and has written a cookbook on the fibroid elimination diet. So we did giveaways. We're in the community virtually. We're in the community up front. I am doing public speaking, speaking to podiums of students and speaking to schools of gynecology and public health. And so by reaching out in those ways, I'm more of an impact producer, going beyond just the film production. We are still currently in production of this documentary. We are 65% complete after almost 6 years. Documentaries do take a very long time, especially when they are evolving with your health. So my story is still continuing. I most recently found out that my fibroids have returned for a third time. And this is after having over 35 tumors removed from my body. And so I am still in the struggle. And so the cameras are still rolling. And so we're looking for support financially. We're looking for community support. We're looking for global support for this effort. There's a group of women in Malawi, South Africa, that are currently in being helped by a mission organization that has invited our camera crew out to not only connect with the women, but also inform them about uterine fibroids. And so I look forward to being able to speak with them about that. So we have, a long way to go, and we hope that through by continuing the impact work, that we'll be able to reach larger audiences and finish the documentary film, get it distributed, and get it out to the larger audiences so that other people can learn what we've learned so far in this documentary effort.
Perfect, thank you. Due to time, I'll just give an opportunity to just one person to ask a question, if there's any, and we move on from there.
Okay, thank you.
Erica, it's Hilary. So thank you so much. I think your documentary shares some very powerful images, and thank you for sharing your own experiences and really drawing attention to what is such an important condition for so many. What struck me was the focus in much of the documentary on surgical approaches. So I'm just interested, because across the world the options and choices may vary in terms of what is available, and perhaps here in Europe, the United Kingdom, we may start with medical approaches to care. And I wondered whether in your documentary you were all individuals who had tried other approaches but were now resorting to surgical interventions, or whether the availability of the medical approaches, which are of course symptom-based, they do not necessarily target the fibroid itself, they target the symptom of the fibroid, and I'm referring here to the excessive bleeding. What the experience is of those colleagues and friends and others who suffer with fibroids might opt for, just so we can be better informed about choices globally.
Sure. And I'm sorry, do you mind repeating the second part of that question about the colleagues? I couldn't hear that. I'm sorry.
Well, just what is available in terms of
yes.
choices, because clearly we need more choices, and we know that the burden is huge, and other conditions get so much attention about widening choices of therapy options, and why are we so limited, and is it that the medical approach is just not the first line in some parts of the world?
Most certainly. That is an ongoing discussion. I had that discussion with physicians and researchers at University of Chicago, the Mayo Clinic, and also at Northwestern. And, unfortunately, the hysterectomies are the first go-to option for treatment and have been for many decades, unfortunately. And when you ask the question of why that is, you get several answers. One, of course, that still being stated as the best way to eliminate your fibroids is with a hysterectomy, which, when you're a 27, 30-year-old woman, as I was, and being told that you need a hysterectomy before you've had children or before you've gotten married or have a partner, that is devastating to hear. And so it's really important for people to understand all the options that are available out there. Currently, there's between 6 to 8 options for fibroid treatment that are less invasive than a hysterectomy. For one, I've had an abdominal myomectomy where the first one was the hands-on cut the fibroids out option, which was very invasive and rendered me into the intensive care unit for 7 days after a hemorrhage. I heard your earlier point on hemorrhaging and the use of iron and helping women build up their blood before these particular surgeries occur. And I have experience with that firsthand. But I did not know at that moment that other less invasive options existed. And so a few years later, I had a robotic myomectomy, which was a little less invasive, but I was also sent back to the hospital with a hematoma and with infection. And so moving forward, a year later, I find out about uterine fibroid embolization, which is the procedure that you all saw clips of in the film clip. And that is a much less invasive process where you can still get pregnant. You're in and out in a couple of hours. You go through your recovery period in a shorter amount of time than you would having an invasive surgery. So that is definitely an option that women don't necessarily know is available because their physicians aren't telling them if they aren't specialized in that area. A lot of physicians may not want to refer their patients over to another clinic for treatment. And so then you're talking with someone who only wants to offer you an invasive surgery. So there's uterine fibroid embolization. There is ACESA, which is another ablation technique that is used to eliminate the fibroids. There is the Sonata, another ablation technique. Yeah, there's several others, but those are the ones I think that are predominantly being used in the States, not widespread enough, but it's worth definitely women who have fibroids to investigate those different other treatments that are less invasive for sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Erica, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to the documentary coming out. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
Okay, our next speaker I would like to introduce is Dawn Ilves. Dawn is a multi-award-winning fibroid advocate who transformed her personal battle with 16 fibroids into a global mission for awareness. As the founder of The Guidance Suit and the creator of My Fibroid Journey, she empowers women to take control of their womb's health. She also serves as a UN Women UK delegate and is part of several influential health groups. In 2024, she received awards such as Top Female Health Advocate and We Are the City's Rising Star Award. And today she will talk about patient advocacy for fibroids in the UK. What are the challenges for fibroid sufferers? So please welcome Dawn Ilves.
Empty, drained, invaded, hopeless, isolated. These aren't just words, they're truths. They're the lived realities of countless of women who face the torment of fibroids each and every day. Words like these come from women I speak to on a daily basis, and as one told me, she was living in her own personal hell. This isn't an exaggeration, it's their truth. But despite fibroids affecting 2 out of 3 women, fibroids are painfully, devastatingly overlooked. For years, women have been living in silence, but today, I, Dawn Ilves, stand here to speak their truth, to bring light to what so many endure every day, behind closed doors, in waiting rooms, in whispered conversations. Our mothers, our sisters, our daughters, our friends. They're trapped in a medical system that too often dismisses their pain, that too often renders them to the shadows. Today, I want to bring their voices to the light. I am 2 out of 3 women. So I started my periods at the age of 14. They were very heavy, very painful from the start. And I'm very grateful I've got a really good relationship with my mum. And I told her my periods are very heavy, they're painful. And she said to me, Dawn, I started my periods at 14 and they were very heavy and they were painful. So we just thought this was a hereditary thing, nothing to worry about. But as I kind of went through this journey in my teenagehood, it just got progressively worse. So we went to the doctor. The doctor said to me, Dawn, there's nothing to worry about. You're a teenager. You've just started your periods. They get better over time. So I thought, okay. He gave me a pill. I don't know what that pill was. To this day, I don't know. But you know, when you're a teenager and you've already got your hormones out of whack and oh goodness, it's all going on. And my mum said, no, you're not taking that pill anymore because I don't know what's going on with you. So here's paracetamol, just deal with the pain through that. And I did. But my teenage years meant that I was planning pain and planning my life around pain, periods. I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to go to events. Think about family holidays. I'd really dread that time when we had to go away because I was like, if I come on my period, I literally need to be in bed. It was awful. I lived with it. I went to an all-girls school, so when we got to around the ages of 16, 17, we started talking about the pill, and not for sex, but we were all in our periods, and we wanted to kind of know, how do you deal with this thing that's just so annoying? So I went to the sexual health clinic, and they said to me, try microgynon. Now, if anyone's been on that, you know what it's like. It's just didn't work. So I tried something else, again, didn't work. Then I heard about the progesterone-only pill, and I heard that that could potentially take away my periods. I tried Cerazette, and it did. And for my whole 20s, I lived my best life. If you remember the Body Form advert, does anyone remember the lady jumping in the sky like, oh my goodness, that was me. Because every party, every event I could go to, I was free. But as I approached my 30s, I thought that this will definitely be the time, within this decade, that I'd want to try and have children. And I had heard that what you need to do is to come off the pill to regulate your cycles again, get your body back to what it was. So I came back off the pill, and I was met with the most horrific, painful, heavy periods I'd ever experienced in my life. And I didn't understand why. My doctor had said, once you get to this age, you're going to be fine. So why was I met with this? But I would buy products such as Feminax. Feminax is made for painful periods. So of course, this must be something that's normal, right? It's something that's common. So I took it and I just dealt with it. When I was 33, I was working at a place that was very toxic. Think lots of stress. It was awful. And I started to experience the pain on my left-hand side of my abdomen. And I thought, this is weird, but it's probably stress, it's fine. Left it for a while and it came back and I thought, no, something's up. And I went to the doctor and the doctor said to me, Dawn, it's probably got something to do with your cycle. I thought, okay. Left it around. And about 2 weeks later, it's still there. It's getting progressively worse. Went back to him. He said, no, it's probably got something to do with your cycle. But you know when you know there's something wrong with your body. So I went to see a female doctor because that was the only way I could bypass him. And she said, Dawn, what you're describing sounds like a cyst on your ovary. And I thought, cyst? I'm 33. I want to have children in this decade. I don't want cysts on my ovary. So I went off and got an ultrasound scan. Now, this is pre-COVID, where you could get your appointments. It takes about 2 weeks. And I went there. The sonographer had a look at me. She goes, Dawn, everything inside looks fine, but you have 2 fibroids. And I said, what's that? And she said, you're going to have to make an appointment with the doctor, and then he will tell you. So I went back to my original doctor, and he said, yes, Dawn, you've got 2 fibroids. They're 4 centimeters in size, but don't worry. They're normal, they're common. Just deal with the pain with ibuprofen and a hot water bottle. And that's what I did. He was my medical practitioner. He's qualified. Why am I going to think anything more? So I went away. But for the next 6 years, I became literally a fibroid definition. If you looked up at the NHS, literally all the symptoms I was showing. And every time I speak, I forget about something. So I'm going to try and remember as much as I can. So these things got progressively worse. So I had a leg pain. It was my left leg pain that I could literally draw a line from my hip all the way down to my toes. Constant. Back pain, leg pain, butt pain, abdomen pain. So it started on the left-hand side, like I said, and it spread. Very heavy, very clotty, prolonged periods. So I experienced flooding, gushing. I'd be at work, stuck in the toilets for 20 minutes at a time, wanting to change my tampons or pads or whatever I had. Constant urination. I had painful sex. I also found that my belly was protruding, and I thought maybe I'm putting on weight. but I later found out that that was a fibroid. And what was so devastating was that I was infertile, but was looking pregnant. And I didn't realize I was infertile until the 12th hour. This progressed for 6 years. I went back to my GP and he said there was nothing wrong. It's just normal, it's common. One of my friends actually told me about the transvaginal ultrasound scan, and I went to see someone there, and they said that my fibroids had progressed to 6 and 7 centimeters in size. But again, there was no management plan put in place for me and how we were going to deal with these fibroids. And she said to me, "Dawn, I see females pregnant with fibroids all the time." And yes, that is true, but it wasn't happening to me, and neither are you telling me how to deal with these fibroids. In 2021, so we're in the height of the pandemic, I went to A&E. The lady did a pelvic ultrasound scan, and she said, again, "Dawn, you're okay." And I thought, this isn't it. So I'm at a new workplace. I opened up to my colleagues, and it's something I never do. I'm very private. And one of my colleagues said, "Try and see if you can get something on our private healthcare." And I did. And be the glory, I saw an amazing gynecologist who said to me, "Right, Dawn, let's see what's going to happen here. Let me rescan you. Let's start again." So he was the first person to listen, to take me seriously and put a management plan in place. He scanned me and he found that I had at least 6 fibroids, the biggest being the size of a grapefruit. And he said, "Dawn, you're going to have an open myomectomy." I can't remember what he said after telling me I had to have an open myomectomy, because I thought if I was ever going to have an operation that resembled a C-section, I'd be giving birth to a child and not to tumours. So at the top of 2022, I went in for my operation, and he said, "Dawn, it's been a success. We took them out. Do you want to see what we removed?" I've got a picture, and I have to say to you, if you don't like these gory things, look away. They removed 16 fibroids. That's what was inside of me. I'll take it down. They left 2 fibroids inside to give me a chance at conceiving, and it was a very difficult operation to recover from. I had an emergency blood transfusion about a week later, and it was awful. However, 6 months later, I managed to conceive, and in 2023, I had my beautiful blessing. She's my world. I had my daughter. Now, I went online and shared my story, and my inbox was inundated with women who'd either gone through this or were going through this, and I was like, but I didn't even know that this was a problem. And off the back of that, I have campaigned and advocated. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here on the behalf of just myself. I'm here on the behalf of the thousands of women who suffer with this condition daily. Women who are left without answers, without options, and without hope. Advocacy for raising awareness for fibroids, it's not just about that, it's about demanding justice for what women go through. So one of the greatest injustices for women suffering with fibroids is delay. And I'm not talking about the delay in which you get diagnosed, because actually, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that long. It's the delay in meaningful management. Women are made to feel as though this is normal and common, and therefore they suffer for a very long time. But if they do muster the courage to see somebody, again, they're met with very dismissive comments such as, "These are normal, it's common. Don't worry about it." Imagine being in pain so severe that it disrupts your everyday life. And I'm not just talking about period pain, I'm talking about bodily pain. Women are left without guidance. Not even a pamphlet is given to you about fibroids or what to expect. And yes, we've got the guidelines such as the NICE guidelines and RCOG, but they're so inconsistent that both patients and the practitioners are left in the dark. They don't align. And so women are left to suffer in silence, and they don't know what to do. And by the time the women actually see somebody who finally listens, they're left with their last resort treatment, which is a hysterectomy. Now, don't get me wrong, that is a very valid treatment option for those that need it and want it, but it shouldn't be the only treatment option put on the table. And for those others that have not gone through a hysterectomy or don't want it, the other treatment option is an open myomectomy. And it's a treatment that's so invasive that it's listed as the third most grueling operation to recover from. Do your Google after that and see, right? And see what it says about that. And I obviously stand here today, and I know people in this room that have had open myomectomies, and they will tell you how hard it is to recover from that operation. I want to read you a quote. "Not enough research is being done on fibroids simply because it does not kill." And let me say that again. Not enough research is being carried out on fibroids simply because it does not kill. And that comes from Dr. Un, who is the founder of the British Fibroid Trust. Another painful truth is the severe limitation on the lack of research on fibroids. We don't even know with certainty why they occur. And yes, there's research to suggest it's an estrogen dominance, but there are many other risk factors. So you've got stress, environmental toxins, diet, so on and so forth. And yet we lack the research needed to understand the links between them. So for some women like myself, I'm a lawyer, I've got workplace stress each and every day, and I've had it for a very long time. But for my friend that's standing beside me, it could be something completely and entirely different. What happens is that women are left with very little options. Try this and try that. And for a person like myself who's on social media, we definitely see people saying, oh, for £3,000, I can give you a little concoction that will shrink your fibroids away. Or for £200, buy this pamphlet and I can tell you how to get rid of your fibroids. Women are so desperate now that they're throwing money at everything and everything they find online to try and get rid of fibroids. And for those like myself who go through surgery, you've got that constant battle in your head with regards to, are they coming back? Am I doing enough to prevent these fibroids? And no one's there to help us. And this is a standard of care that is not acceptable. Fibroids, they don't discriminate, but the care that women receive does. So fibroids disproportionately affects Black women, with those being 3 times more likely to develop fibroids, and their symptoms are more severe. Yet when they seek help, they're often met with greater barriers. So imagine a condition that is so severe that overwhelmingly affects Black women, and yet when we look at our medical institutions, our research priorities, where are the initiatives? Because I don't see any. Where's the urgency? And we're left to ask, why is there so little attention given to a condition that affects so many? And sometimes the silence speaks for itself. It suggests that perhaps because this condition affects Black women disproportionately, it's not seen as urgent enough. It's not prioritized. Beyond the physical suffering, fibroids really does take its mental toll. I created a support group called the Guidance Suite. It's a grassroots organization, and I did this off the back of suffering by myself, and I didn't want anybody else to suffer in the way I did. Because the mental health care is rarely put into packages when we're talking about fibroids. And think about the women who come to these support groups, and it's the first time that they're sharing their stories, and believe me, there are many here that has been shed. This really does need to be a priority, because it's not about just the physicalities, the suffering that comes with that, it's the mental toll as well. So today I stand here to ask, how much longer must we wait for change? How many more women should suffer with this condition? Women that are affected by fibroids, they need more than sympathy, they need systematic change. They need healthcare that listens, that understands, that ensures that this is made a real priority. And they need advocacy that breaks the silence. This isn't just a call for awareness, believe me, it's not. It's a demand for justice. For every woman that has suffered alone, who has shed a tear, who has been silenced, for every life that has been disrupted by fibroids, this must end. We cannot stand by as women continue to suffer in silence, and this is a fight that we all must get on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. And in the interest of time, we have no questions for now, but we can keep them for later for the panel discussion because she will be part of it as well. And now we are almost ready for our break. Stand away from this. We're almost ready for our break. First, I have a small announcement to make. Small announcement. Yeah, very. Small announcement to make. We are very sorry to announce. Apologies. Okay, so we're very sorry to announce Leslie Regan has informed us that due to illness, she will not be able to attend our event today. She sends her apologies as well. And we are going to continue with the program as planned, and we're going to allow for a bit of extra time during our breakout rooms, our panel discussion, in our breaks. Apologies for this. And the next thing that we have on now is our break. We're going to be away for 15 minutes comfort break, have some hot drinks. There's an urn behind you and some tea and coffee, I think. And please use the toilet, which is just through the doors and to the right. Thank you. We'll be back in 15 minutes.
Raised the possibility of an event to discuss uterine fibroids. I said there is one person you absolutely have to invite. And I understand Simon Woolley said exactly the same. I said there's one person you absolutely have to invite, and that one person is Professor Dame Elizabeth Anyonwu. Dame Elizabeth is well known as a pioneer of sickle cell treatment in Britain and indeed across the world. But her expertise goes way beyond this and encompasses cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs disease, any number of different conditions. Her interest in sickle cell is at once personal, professional, and political. Personal, because sickle cell affected her cousin in Birmingham, and although undiagnosed, there's reason to believe it affected one of her relatives in Nigeria as well. Professional, because Dame Elizabeth's career as a state-registered nurse, as somebody who trained as a midwife, her career as a health visitor, as a community nurse tutor, and as professor of nursing at University of West London, her career has been intimately bound up with the treatment of sickle cell. And political, because her work in healthcare is part of her commitment to social justice and part of her commitment to racial justice. In this context, I should mention Dame Elizabeth's association with the Fabians, with Needle, a campaigning group set up to defend the NHS, her association with Bogle-Louverture publications, which galvanized a generation of Black and Asian radicals in Britain, particularly during the 1970s and the 1980s. I should mention the time she spent with the Black Panthers in the US, the Black Panthers, of course, who did great work in terms of developing clinics to treat sickle cell. Her work with the Pan-African Students Association in Manchester, where she met the celebrated activist Olive Morris, and her time with OAD, the Organization of Women of African and Asian Descent, perhaps the most significant organization of women, political organization of women of color in British history. There is so much more I could say, but I will restrict myself to 3 observations. First, that Dame Elizabeth, in addition to her pioneering work in healthcare, has done great work in terms of Black history in Britain, not least as chair of the Mary Seacole Memorial Statue Appeal,
On a personal note, my father was at St. Thomas's Hospital for 3 weeks during the COVID pandemic, and I visited him as often as I could. And I drew great strength from the presence of the statue, which is situated immediately outside the hospital. Simon has also mentioned the work she did to make sure that Mary Seacole remains on the curriculum. Second, you should read her memoir, Dreams of My Mother. It's a fascinating account of healthcare innovation and a wonderful story of Dame Elizabeth's family in Nigeria and her Irish mother and Irish grandparents. When you read this book, you will find in its pages a person of deep expertise, somebody who exhibits profound care, and somebody with an irrepressible sense of humor. Third, and this is one of my favorite facts about Dame Elizabeth. Dame Elizabeth has a Brit Award, which she shares with Dua Lipa. In 2021, with the COVID pandemic raging, Dua Lipa dedicated the award to Dame Elizabeth for her work fighting racial injustice and protecting healthcare workers on the front line. Please join me in welcoming Professor Dame Elizabeth Anyuonwu for a conversation with our Vice Principal, Francesca Moore.
Thank you very much, Dame Elizabeth, for joining me today in conversation in this really, really important multidisciplinary conference. It's a total pleasure to talk to you, and welcome to Homerton. I wanted to start by asking you about your career in nursing and what drew you to a career in nursing?
Well, it goes back, well, first of all, I was conceived in Cambridge. It would have been between Trinity Hall and Newnham College. So did you all hear that? Ah, this is the spicy bit, you see. So I was conceived in Cambridge because I don't know exactly between Trinity Hall, which is where my father was studying law, or Newnham College, which is where my mother studied for 2 years, classics, but became pregnant with me. So I said I have a soft spot for Cambridge University. Sorry, what else am I supposed to say? This is called getting old.
I was asking about your what drew you to a career in nursing.
Sorry. Okay, so the link to what I've already said was that I spent the first 9 years of my life in a children's home, constantly visited by my mother and always told by my mother that she would bring me home when she got sorted out. So whilst I was in the children's home, I did suffer very badly from eczema, my armpits, and my arms and my legs. So much so that I had to regularly visit the sick bay. And in those days, eczema was treated with coal tar paste, which was beautifully cooling on the skin. Then they'd put a gauze over that, and then they would wrap a bandage around that. So that was great. But the part that I didn't like was when the dressing had to be changed, because by this time, everything had stuck to the skin, the bandage and the gauze. And I used to peek around the door to see whether whether the white nun was there. All the nuns were white, they were predominantly Irish, but this particular nun wore a white habit. If I didn't see her, I would just scarp her, and I was a very good athlete later on, and I think it started from then. The reason I wanted the white nun to treat me, I later discovered she was actually also a nurse, because she was the only one that could treat me without causing any pain. Not only without causing any pain, but she would actually make me laugh. And I never wanted to be a nun. Could explore reasons why, but I won't. But I decided, she so influenced me, I wanted to be like her. And then when I heard she was something called a nurse, that's when I decided, and I've never regretted the decision to go into that career.
So Homerton as a college has a long history of training nurses, a long history of educating women in the nursing profession. And we also have the first university professor of nursing, Jo McPeak. So we have a long history with nursing. And you were the first sickle cell specialist nurse, weren't you?
That's right.
Can
yes.
you tell us about that work?
Yes, I was very fortunate. I was a community nurse tutor, and I was based at the Central Middlesex Hospital in Harlesden in Brent. And I'd always had an interest in sickle, as you said, from personal point of view, but also professional. I always had an interest in genetics. And the now late Dr. Misha Božovic arrived at the hospital in the mid-70s, and she realized that sickle cell was a very significant issue and really wasn't being addressed very well, and also was aware that there was not much information provided to the professionals at the hospital. So she gave 2 lectures. She gave one to start with, but there was such an immense interest that she gave another one. And I attended both lectures and asked a lot of questions, each one. And after the second lecture, I was walking down the long corridor of the hospital, and I heard this click, 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 hello, click, click, click. I turned around, and it was Misha herring towards me, And she said, "You seem very interested in this." And to cut a long story short, she found the funding because what had happened, I'd been to America on holiday, but I also realized that nurses were involved with the multidisciplinary teams. This was in Los Angeles and San Francisco where I realized that. Up until then, I had thought that it was just hematologists and pediatricians that were involved in the care of those affected by the condition. But in America, I came across the sickle cell nurses, and they were so kind to me, actually. When they realized I was interested, they loved my accent for a start, but they really taught me a lot. And when I got back and told Misha about this, she found the funding for me to become what was the first sickle cell nurse. Yeah.
And so sickle cell is an inherited blood disorder. And who does it affect?
Well, it seems to have originated in parts of the world where you find falciparum malaria. So although people have the view that it's only black people, it's not true. It's found in the Mediterranean areas, obviously Italy, parts of Italy, Greece, etc., and also in the Middle East. But in this country, the majority of people that are affected are of African and African Caribbean origins.
So there's a crossover there, isn't there, really, with our thinking about uterine fibroids? And how, in a healthcare setting, how do we make populations who are sometimes invisible more visible?
Yeah, that's interesting because, this saying, hidden in plain sight. I got a chapter about the development of sickle cell services in my memoir. And when I started to get interested, as I said, sort of from genetics and then sickle cell, that was the mid-1970s. And I went to a genetic counselling textbook, which was published in 1976, looking to see what they said about sickle cell, and this is what I came across. Bear with me. So the textbook was called Genetic Counselling, and it was by Alan Stevenson and Claire Davison, published, as said, in 1976. Sickle cell anemia is not of great consequence to us in the context of genetic counselling in the United Kingdom. The sickling trait and sickle cell anemia appear to be confined to peoples of African and Eastern origin. 1976. I don't know where these authors were. Hebrides? I don't know. But the ignorance, really, in that statement so hidden in plain sight, so that there were many of us that were interested, I'm talking about nurses and midwives and medics, but also in the community, who were influenced a lot by what was happening in the United States, because of the civil rights movement. And as was mentioned, the Black Panthers had actually identified iron deficiency anemia and sickle cell anemia as two of the key health issues that they saw as not being prioritized, and campaigned on those issues. So being interested in politics and being interested in health, being a Black woman and being interested in Black health, it just happened that this was what I wanted to get involved with.
Yeah. So can I ask you a bit more about that, about being a nurse activist? I spoke a little bit earlier about how working with Lord Woolley has made me think very clearly about being a scholar activist. And what was it like for you being interested in politics and having that professional expertise in healthcare? And what was that like?
It was great fun, irritating people, actually. But more importantly, working with like-minded people. And Lord Woolley mentioned needle. I mean, whoever invented that term for a group of us that were primarily students, actually, they were medical students, dental students, nursing students, but there were also some qualified staff as well. And it was at yet another time when the NHS was, there was a movement to privatise. And so that was what pulled us all together. I think if you're a questioning person, which I was a sort of from childhood, and also being a woman of colour, who actually, though, didn't meet anybody that looked like me until I was 18. So I grew up totally in a white environment. And I think that was very helpful in one respect, because the white British culture was all that I knew. And I realized that it did help me when I was involved with others campaigning for issues like sickle cell, because you sort of knew the thinking of some of them, not all of them. And the more you know of somebody's way of thinking, you're in advance of the barriers that they're going to place in front of you. So it certainly helped. And one of the things that really speeded up getting sickle cell, I was going to say higher on the NHS agenda, I'm not even sure if it was on the agenda, but let's say higher, was when we realised that, and we didn't want to compete with other conditions which were as equally serious as sickle cell anemia. But when we realised that there are actually more cases, there are more individuals in this country affected by sickle cell disease than there were for cystic fibrosis. Now, of course, cystic fibrosis is a very serious illness and requires all the services that have been developed. But we use that as a model, and when we were in front of politicians or health policy people, whoever made the decisions, it was great just to sit there and, to start off with, they were looking down on us, what would we, blah, blah, blah. And when you then came out with, well, how do you feel about the fact that I think in those days we were 8,000 individuals with cystic fibrosis and 12,000 with sickle cell disease. How can you justify that? Well, we couldn't justify it. So it was a quick win to be able to use statistics like that and to say, if you really believe in health equalities, you need to be addressing this issue.
And can I ask you about the period of time that your career spans for the NHS? I mean, the NHS is a fantastic organisation. It's fascinating, and many of us here have a strong interest in its history and its future. So, what are your reflections on healthcare free at point of access and from your career?
Yeah, we can see I'm left wing. Come on. And the other thing is, I feel, I've grown up with the NHS. I was born in 1947, and the NHS was started in 1948. So from a personal point of view, and the various reasons I've needed to be cared for by the NHS from childhood into adulthood to some extent. And then understanding that politics in the creation of the NHS, that it wasn't straightforward, and we're still having those battles in terms of preserving those original objectives of that created the National Health Service. So you get both a personal and professional involvement with it.
And how do the political battles over the NHS manifest for frontline workers like nurses?
Well, I think if you look at the history of nursing, and there's some excellent books about the politics of nursing, you had this whole gender issue that historically, majority of nurses were women. So that's changing. But of course, it's interesting to see that even though women are in the majority in nursing, and of course, men in nursing now, when you look at the hierarchy of nursing in the NHS, it's the men that have got more senior posts. So, we're still fighting the gender issue to some extent. Sorry, have I answered it?
Yeah,
I'll go off on tangents, so please pull me back.
I was asking about the political contestations over the NHS and how they manifest for frontline staff. And I mean, gender's really important, isn't it, in healthcare?
Gender's important. And I think if you look at the waves of political campaigns in respect of various aspects of the issues that we want to retain, so there's a whole issue from prescriptions to, there's so many issues that one good thing though is that in various surveys, the relationship of the British public with the NHS is extremely strong. And it struck me with the pandemic that a significantly larger percentage of the population, sadly, had to come in contact with the NHS who would not really have come in contact. And it did strike me that, more people are going to be aware of the role of, for example, nurses, both in the hospital but also in the community, because I was a community nurse for many years, and the public needed the health service. It was a period of fear, wasn't it, if you remember, with the awful number of deaths and chronic illness that's still impacting people with long COVID, for example. It was sad that it happened, but it actually created a much greater awareness and closeness, I think, for people who weren't part of the health service with those that were.
Can I ask you about your time as a community nurse? Mm-hmm. So that must be part of your career where health inequalities would have been very apparent in your day-to-day practice. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, certainly. So I worked in a part of Brent in Wembley, and as with virtually anywhere really, you get a mixture of extremely affluent to incredible elements of poverty. And I remember visiting one family, and it was winter, and it was freezing in the house, absolutely freezing. And the mother was heating the children. There was about 4 quite young children. They were seated in front of the oven for heating. So we talk about health and safety, but when I started to inquire, it was sheer poverty, absolute poverty. And because I'd been involved in politics, and I had for a short period been in the Labour Party, but I started to get an understanding I got a better understanding of how local government worked. And so I immediately found out who were the local councillors and linked in with one of them. And he got a lot of things sorted out for the family. And the interesting comment he said, you're the first health visitor that's ever contacted me. And I thought, and in a way it didn't surprise me, because health visiting is part of the nursing profession. And there was always this sort of debate as to whether nurses should get involved in politics. I didn't actually get involved with it because I thought I'd just get on with it, because here's some really weird things, we should be pure, we should keep away from politics. Excuse me, purity? Going back to, and I do admire what Florence Nightingale has done for nursing, don't get me wrong, but if you look at to be fair, Charles Dickens' book had influenced, the Sarah Gamp and the alcoholic nurses who were nursing people at night in their own homes. God. Anyway, so you can see where the sort of the very disciplinarian aspect of the history of nursing came from. But, this idea that nurses shouldn't get involved with politics. Also, but nursing is politics, health is politics. I couldn't understand it. And rather than argue with some people who are actually my friends or colleagues, I just thought, there's, where's Lord Simon? Is he here? You were in charge, he was the CEO of, who can help me out? OBV. That's right. Well, I had an acronym, not for that, but it was OBO. Sorry, if you are sensitive to swear words, put something in your ears straight away. Order of the bleeding obvious. So there seem to be things that were so obviously like inequalities that you should be questioning. But I soon learned, particularly in my health visiting studies, you could get into a lot of difficulties. In fact, I was failed on my practical assessment for health visiting because I was questioning too much. And the supervisor, so she was a health visitor with a bit of extra experience, I don't know, extra exam or something. She would supervise health visitor students, but she would then mark them on their clinical placement. And she failed me. And she failed me because she said, you're asking too many questions, you haven't got the right attitude to become a health visitor. Fortunately, this is where my political affiliations came in very nicely, because I was really upset. I wanted to be a health visitor. I really thought she did fail me. So I went to my little clique with Needle. So this was their challenge. How were they going to sort Elizabeth's major problem out? And they put me in touch with, I think he was the chief medical officer at the time, who was in the Labour Party. And they said, go and see him. And I saw him, and suddenly I hadn't failed. So I saw the really positive aspects of politics just from something very personal that had happened to me. But I also realised how it made me understand more why people might not want to get involved with politics because of the negative impact it could have on their professional career.
And can I ask you a bit more about your work as an activist? So I know we're all dying to hear about Michael Gove, Mary Seacole, and the curriculum. Talk us through the...
Simon and I had great fun.
Yeah, I mean, we want to know all the details.
Because I think that's the other thing. Sometimes I get the impression from colleagues and others who are a little bit wary of getting involved in politics. We don't realise it's actually great fun, as well as, there's obviously a serious side. But, you see a problem and you realise that the only way you can address that problem is through a political approach. But I think people think when you say political, they think you're outside with the banners or you've got to be an MP. No, life is political. I don't see any difficulty there. But certainly this issue of wanting to keep Mary Seacole out of the curriculum. And it was just really the advent of online petitions.
Yeah.
And it's Simon's idea, and is Simon here? Oh, he's disappeared just when I need.
I think he might have stepped out for a
I'll
moment.
tell him off when I next see
So
him.
Michael Gove is revising or trying to revise the history curriculum.
That's right. And he wanted, it wasn't only Mary Seacole he wanted. He actually wanted Florence Nightingale to be out. There was a whole range women. Let's talk about that. That was it. That was what it was. Because when we looked at the people he wanted to take out of the curriculum, it was all women. We thought, whoa, come on. And actually, you know, when you've got an issue like that, and you're sitting around either phoning, when we had meetings as well, what can we do about it? And it was Simon who suggested the online campaign. And a lot of us, you know, didn't really know what this was all about because it was so new. And so he was the one that, you know, set it up through Operation Black Vote. And it was incredible. And, you know, I had a computer at home, and every time I refreshed it, there was another 500 people that had signed it. I just thought, this is interesting. Click. It just took off. But you see, the reason why Michael Gove got really upset about this was that, again, OBV, I think it's their idea that everybody who signed the petition, a message was sent. Oh, yes, I know what it was. An email was sent. Oh, it is funny. An email was sent to Michael Gove's office. So suddenly, were your ears burning, Simon? We're talking about the petition, and your idea was that every time somebody signed the petition, an email was sent through to Michael. Exactly. And he couldn't get over it. He couldn't. Well, I suppose his office couldn't cope with it. But yeah. We give up. No, Simon, really. So, it's his idea. Don't blame me. But what was good, though, was the way we did work together. That it was hard work, but it was very enjoyable work, wasn't it? Because how long did it take? I was just saying that, yes. There you go. Yeah. That's right, yes.
I remember Gove's office called and said, we've had a conversation with Michael, and they want to stop, and you've got your Mary Seacole.
There we go.
Orlando Equiano.
Yes, that was the other one. There we go, yeah.
And it was such a great victory.
Yes.
I think the other thing too, it also galvanized more support for the Mary Seacole campaign.
Absolutely, yes, definitely. Because it raised I mean, I would never have thought the Daily Mail would carry anything about Mary Seacole, come on. So it did get huge coverage, didn't it? It was, yes.
So was that, for both of you, was that your first experience of digital activism?
For me, it was.
Yes, I mean, it showed the power of the petition.
Yeah.
And that what you could do from your desk, and how you could translate that into a new story, public political pressure. Michael Gove had a lot of things to deal with. This was not one that he expected.
Yeah. And the other thing about that campaign was it brought together all sorts of different people from different ethnic background, gender, political persuasion. We talked about Mary Seacole being, you know, of Jamaican and Scottish heritage. Scotland came on board. Oh, it was wonderful. It really was fantastic. And nursing, all the aspects of the history of Mary Seacole, which not many people knew, brought these different people together. And that's what I really, that really cheered me up, actually, to see that coming together.
So I'd love to ask you about the statue. In fact, I teach about the statue on my geography course because it's the first statue of a named Black woman in
That's
public,
right,
isn't
yes.
it? So unveiled in 2016. And it's really significant because there is a large question in public space in Britain: where are all the women?
Yes.
And to have the statue of Mary Seacole unveiled in public space is really significant. But it was a long road, wasn't it?
It took nearly 13 years.
Wow.
And, there was an artificial war created between Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole. And it was a few people that were sort of trying to stir the trouble up. And we would always have to emphasize we were not in competition with Florence Nightingale. The history of nursing, and why should they be giving the impression that two women were fighting against each other? So we were able to stamp on that. But there were times when it was quite depressing because the racism, the sexism, and there was one night that I didn't sleep. I was so upset because there'd been some publicity and the rubbish that was. She was being called a prostitute. It was just horrible. It really was horrible. And I remember not really being upset about that, and then ringing a friend, and she said, the next time that happens, just ring me straight away. Because the minute I they say do a talk, and it did help me. But we started laughing at it in the end. But there was this core, wasn't there, of negativity, which was not represented in the country. But it just showed me how there were certain people who thought that they were part of the establishment and that they could use newspapers like the Times newspaper. And we thought, well, we'll show you. And actually, that was stamped upon. But it wasn't a very pleasant experience at times.
So in those, and I think this is perhaps a question for both of you, what keeps you going in those difficult times?
Oh, a good fight.
A good fight, yeah.
Yeah. And also knowing you're on the right side of history.
Yeah.
And also the fact it was to do, for me, and I think so many people, a woman, a Black woman, a woman of mixed heritage, that's like me, and the support we were getting from people up and down the country was incredible.
I think the other thing too is that we were fighting for the next generation.
Yes.
Too.
Yes.
And knowing that this wasn't just about us.
That's right.
Because Michael Gove's assertion that school children should just be learning about Churchill.
That's right. War, men and war.
Men and war. And not about heroes who've actually fought for peace.
That's right. And my granddaughter was 7 or 8 at the time, and so she was taught about. She's in Wales, and the next time she came to stay with me, she said, "Grandma," she said, "I hear Mary Seacole." Oh, I thought, whoa, yes. Did you work with her?
So, Dame Elizabeth, we're coming to the end of our time together, and I wanted to leave it a little bit of time to see if there are any questions for you from the floor. But before I do that, I wanted to thank you for a wonderful conversation, a wide-ranging conversation, and to say how much of a pleasure it has been to talk to you. And if there are any questions, we'd be delighted to take them.
I've got one, because I was there with you at the time when the Times and the Florence Nightingale present custodians attacked you and what we were doing. And it was personal, it was hostile. it was wretched. So the question for our generation of young black women now, what would you impart to them on how they deal with polite hostility?
Yes, I think it's not to deal with it on your own, because the times when I was on my own, you could feel quite overwhelmed just with the type of people that were creating that hostility. And then when you linked up with other people, you realized they were actually in the minority, but they were linked with the establishment. They did have the ear of certain journalists. And do you remember that awful Daily Mail? Wasn't it front page? It was horrendous. And that, I think that's the one that really upset me. But then, you know, the next day, the amount of contacts that were made, and I think that's the don't feel you do things on your own, and really work hard at creating information about whatever issue it is to bring on board other people, because it is definitely strength in numbers. Yes.
One of the encouraging things about that campaign was the high-profile politicians and other celebrities that signed the letter for us. So when you felt lonely, you saw all these illustrious people backing you.
Yes. Oh, fantastic! Particularly Courtney Pine. Do you remember jazz music? Yeah, no, but I think it was both sides. But obviously the well-known people. But what struck me was, in terms of the petition, Simon, the number of people from all parts of the United Kingdom, and even overseas, but particularly the United Kingdom, and the way it helped the Mary Seacole Memorial Statue appeal, and people were sending in, from pounds to significant amounts. That hostility turned into positivity in terms, and it actually helped in an awful way. It actually helped because it got people talking about, well, who is this Mary Seacole? And
it got people afraid of you and I.
Yeah.
Don't mess with Elizabeth. Don't mess with Operation Black Vote.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons was that, with your political expertise and media savvy and all that, and I was a nerd. I love history. I really do love history. And I was reading everything and anything about Mary Seacole. So, when people would say, oh, she wasn't even a nurse. She wasn't even a registered nurse. I'm sorry, but this was the way it was being told to me. Somebody talked like that to me. Well, she wasn't really a nurse, but she was registered. And I said, well, do you know when registration of nurses actually happened? 1919 or something, 1912, 1919. And I said, do you know when Mary Seacole died? 1881. So how on earth is she going to become a registered nurse? And, so it was good to see how our knowledge and our links in the community, bring those together. It was very powerful. And the celebrations do you know that when that statue was unveiled by Baroness Fleur Benjamin, it was the week after the Brexit vote. Do you remember that period? I mean, it was a divisive period. And when the day of the unveiling was the first time we had some sunshine. Literally, the sun it was a beautiful event, actually, because it brought a lot of people together. And there were so many naysayers who said, you're never going to raise this £750,000. Give up, you're never going to do it. And we did it, it took a long time. But all those people, not all the people, we got told off by people who wanted to come to the ceremony. We just couldn't. There wasn't the numbers, and that in itself showed the strength of support for the statue. There's somebody else. Oh, she's had her hand up a long time.
Thank you so much. A question to either of actually. In this day and age of 6-second clips and this competition for people's attention, especially young people, and how hard it is to kind of cut through all the noise of what's going on in kind of macro politics to be able to reach people. What tips would you give, or what observations do you have when it comes to things like single issue campaigns? Because I think people are trying to talk about women's health as a banner, or Black health as a banner. And today we're really talking about a singular issue and those translational lessons that we have from sickle cell. But even sickle cell is still in the place where it's having to fight nice to even fund it because it's not seen the same as haemophilia and things like that. So what's that space, or what tips would you give?
Well, I think I feel actually a bit more positive in terms of the impact of social media. If you take sickle cell, Supercell, that came out on Netflix, and then the impact of that on social media was tremendous for sickle cell to raise, the awareness amongst the young people. Here they had, it's such a clever idea in Supercell to say that individuals who had sickle cell had power, had a magical, and that generation, and I just thought that there was a showing of it at Theatre Peckham, and I went down to it. That theatre was jam-packed with youth, Black youth, and so this business of hard to reach, all that rubbish. It is rubbish because it means that you're not coming from the place of the people you're trying to reach, if you think they're hard to reach. And fair enough, you may find that they're hard to reach. You should be involving people who have no difficulty reaching those individuals. And I think that's a big lesson so I do like social media, but I see that the power it can have. So I'm on Blue Sky at the moment. Anybody else doing Blue Sky? Yeah. Anyway, sorry. I see the power of it. And I think we have to make use of those platforms, and we have to keep up to date with those platforms that have a much greater reach than the more traditional ways that we had perhaps still use in health, for example.
Brilliant. Well, Dame Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. What a pleasure it has been. So on behalf of the college and the conference, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I would like to welcome all of our panelists to join us for a discussion. Please come to the chairs.
There you go. Yeah, that's on.
All right. Oh, that's a lot louder. Okay, so we discussed a lot of questions during the breakout rooms. And as you can see, we have summarized some of the points that were raised. And we have also formulated a few questions for our panel that we can start off with. And of course, anybody from the audience can jump in at any time and we'll hand you a microphone. All right. So firstly, I'll quickly read out what is the summary. It looks like there is a difference in NHS versus private treatment in delays between getting scans and getting treatment for fibroids. There was a point raised quite often that the discussion about women's health issues needs to be normalized among the general public and medical professionals. The power of patient advocacy was raised quite a few times as well, but not all the burden should fall to them. It is also on us as professionals. In the workplace, we need to provide items for women's health, such as tampons and pads, and support for those who are experiencing pain, such as being allowed leave. Finally, adding uterine fibroids to the NHS Core 20+5 agenda would be quite essential and was raised quite a few times. So, therefore, taking these points into account, the questions that we would like to start off for a panel. First question is, how can we leverage new technologies such as AI to inform practitioners and reduce the burden of invasive treatments, extended hospital stays related to fibroids?
So, can you, yes, can you hear? So, that's a huge question, number one. I think that to take that forward, you're really talking about how can you use developments in artificial intelligence to give correct information about education, because I think that certainly in the room that our tables were in, a message that came through was about enhancing access to reliable evidence-based information. So when you talk about leveraging AI, it's about how can that help us harness the information that is out there to give consistent information, because I think for every medical condition, when people are trying to access information, what they want to do is access consistent and evidence-based information. So I would see that as an important leverage of AI. And then the second part of the question is about reducing the burden of invasive treatments, extended hospital stays. In there surely has to be choice. And it's about knowing what your choices are. And that's, again, how you can harness AI, because choice is beyond just invasive treatments that require hospital stays. It is much wider than that.
I suppose also the question is that at what age actually do we have to inform, the public about the dangers of fibroids and what they should know about, what's normal in periods and so on. So at what age do we start, do you think?
Because I'd like to offer that to others on the table. I mean, I have my own view, but I'd like others to be able to share that as well.
So I'll come in then. Thank you for that. I didn't realise they were going to be fixed questions. I might slip outside the questions if I may. So just to introduce myself to colleagues, I'm an academic. I'm a professor of social policy and race at King's in London. But I'm very much here today in a personal capacity, having experienced fibroids. And what struck me, even though I'm an academic, so have quite substantial research skills, was really the scarcity of information. And what I would have really appreciated was some kind of one-stop portal, if you will, that talked me through the 4 options that were made available to me through the NHS. And the 4 options that I was told were to do nothing and wait for the onset of menopause, with the expectation that that would reduce levels of estrogen and therefore have a beneficial impact in terms of the growth of the fibroids, to have an embolism, so in other words, cut off the supply, the blood supply to the fibroids, to have a myomectomy, which has been spoken about earlier, which is very invasive, or indeed to have a hysterectomy. And what I wanted at that point was rigorous information, informed information for an intellectual layperson, as it were. I didn't want to go to a medical journal. I didn't want to read in depth in that way, but I still wanted quite rigorous, substantive information to help me make a decision. How do you make a decision about which 4 of those options to take? Because I had no clue. And at that time, I wasn't aware of these different networks that I've become aware of today. So I think education for me is absolutely crucial. We were taught, I went to a girls' school, we were taught about biology, we were taught about sexual reproduction, but at no stage were we taught about the possibility of fibroids, of heavy bleeding during menstruation. And I think what I have to say to colleagues at Homerton and to colleagues who put on this conference is a huge thank you, actually, because what it's done for me on a personal level, which I think is absolutely significant, is that it's joined the pieces of an otherwise disparate jigsaw, medical jigsaw in terms of my gynecological health, that I hadn't realized belonged together. So I think education is absolutely key. It should be, and I feel sorry for teachers because they're expected to do so much, but it should be embedded in the curriculum. I think there is perhaps an argument with the curriculum review that Becky Francis is leading on, Professor Becky Francis, to feed into that something such as this should be essential.
That's great. Actually, that follows on to my question, actually, to Dame Elizabeth, because obviously you managed to incorporate the role of Mary Seacole in the curriculum. So how easy do you think it would be for us to also incorporate this into the curriculum? What steps do we have to follow, actually, to make sure that this is also part of the curriculum and we can teach young children while they're young that actually this is a problem and it needs to be sorted out now?
Well, my experience has been more the difficulties of getting issues into the nursing curriculum. And what I've realized talking to colleagues from other disciplines is that the minute you ask for something to be included in the curriculum, be it in the school or professional courses, hands go up in horror. We've got too much in the curriculum already. We can't fit anything else. And so it's how do you identify priorities and who do you garner to argue the case that will impress the people who are in charge of designing curriculums, and also to explain to us that maybe don't deal with that type of curriculum, what are some of the issues, what are the priorities, and the overall objectives of the curriculum, because you could then possibly advise them, well, actually, you see this section, you could actually fit it into there, because you're not adding anything to the curriculum, you're incorporating this issue into a subject heading that you've already got in your curriculum.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask one more question about funding, because obviously I haven't introduced Professor Helen Banana yet. So Professor Helen Banana is from the UKRI, so she oversees funding. So the question is actually, how can we work with the funding bodies to make sure that they recognize the gaps in research in fibroids? What causes fibroids? How can we detect them early? So I think this is for the question specifically for you, but the others can also chip in.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm just Dr. Bonham, so I'm not affiliated with any research organization, so I'm part of the government, UK Research and Innovation, working for the Medical Research Council. And really the questions around how can we increase funding have to start with the strength of need. So what is the challenge? What is the question that needs to be addressed? Well, for me, listening to what everybody said, I think the big question is, why is there discrepancy in people who develop fibroids? Is it a question of different genetics? Is it a question of the environment in which the fibroids are growing? Are there external factors that might be influencing things that we can then change? So I think there's really important research questions. And I think in terms of the health equality aspect that is also coming through is a really important consideration. We have to consider diversity. So one of the things that the Medical Research Council and UK Research and Innovation has championed of late is the importance of getting diversity in experimental design. And that diversity can include sex, so the differences between the way men and women react to different treatments, or the ability to diagnose things in men or women, or health behaviors. Women tend to go to the GP, men don't, that kind of thing. Diversity in genetic background, diversity in environmental setting. Do you live at a coast? Do you live in the middle of a big city? And diversity in cultural practices. So some practices differ, and so that that cultural difference will also influence how disease is manifest and how we look at it. So I think in terms of how we get more funding, it's make the case, so make a strong case for the unmet clinical need, which I think has been well made, and then put forward the hypothesis that can be answered. So questions around, is it a genetic difference? Are there differences in the way things happen? So it's making the case, it's providing a good case for what research needs are and how feasible the research is, and then thinking about the outcomes. So is it easy to take the outcomes of the research through to translation to the NHS, for example, or to industry partners, or to others who are setting policy and practice. So there are a number of things that can be addressed, and they're all doable, and they're all really important. And I think, so there's a really strong case to take forward. Thank you.
Yeah, Julie.
Thank you very much. I mean, whether it's education, whether it's research, what we have to do is actually prioritize an area that has completely until now lacked being a priority. And so, the argument for the case, it's the same for why we have to educate people, and that's all people in schools, in medical curriculums, in nursing curriculums, educate our funders. It is about the messaging that this is a priority, and hitherto women's health has not been prioritized. We've heard examples from our audience about how aspects of women's health are not prioritized. So there is a narrative around prioritizing issues that affect large numbers of the population, and particular groups in the population even more so than others.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on actionable and maybe preventative approaches. In particular, this is something that we have been discussing quite a lot internally, and I would really like to hear your opinion of the panel about it. What would you think are the benefits of screening for fibroids? Do you think that there is only value in screening with ultrasound, which would provide a more definitive diagnosis, or is there value in less, lighter touch screening, such as questionnaires, and especially screening at the point of primary care? What would you say is the value of that, and how can this be implemented as well? Of course.
So I guess my bias would be there's no point in screening if you can't do something about it. So really important to have something in place to be able to offer women that is acceptable. So I think previous approaches to research haven't taken into account the acceptability of the research and the acceptability of the way in which you approach treatment. So I think having that information available is really important. But it sounds to me from the discussions today like there are some very promising new ways of treating things. And so I think treating early is important. So it's identifying when the best points. So in terms of research, it's identifying the best points to undertake screening so that you can then prevent or treat as necessary, and identify which populations you might want to screen more frequently because they're more at risk of developing fibroids. So there's a huge amount of research that could be undertaken to help understand how we go about putting things like screening and treatment and prevention in place. But without the research evidence, it's unlikely to happen, right? So we need that research evidence first.
So we've got a question on the floor, actually. So, yeah.
Sorry, Priscilla, me again. A question for Dr. Jessica. My understanding of the Medical Research Council is that it requires multiple sex research in terms of making sure that there are different sexes involved in the research when someone's putting forward a proposal. But there's no such thing as a requirement for ethnicity. It's encouraged, but there's no requirement for ethnicity. And actually, if you're trying to do single-sex research, which in women's health specifically you would be, it's actually quite hard to get funding from the Medical Research Council. So isn't there a structural block against this very research? Because the way that the council is actually encouraging research is that it should be multi-sex with other considerations for other things. So how would we lobby that council to say, well, actually, this is counteracting against research for women, but also research into issues like uterine fibroids that affect more in terms of one ethnicity over another?
Thank you very much. That's a really important question, and I'm pleased to say that actually there is a requirement now. It's very new. So in the last 2 years, we have required applicants to look at all forms of diversity in experimental design. The first step was to look at the male-female, and if you could put forward the case for only working in one sex, then that's fine. You had to justify the use of a single sex. So it's not that you can't do research on women only or men only, but you have to be able to justify why you're taking that approach. Clearly with uterine fibroids, there is justification for working in single sex. And then the diversity aspect is required. So again, the reviewers and the decision makers, our academic panels, have to take into account whether or not diversity has been addressed in the experimental design. It is a key feature of experimental design now. Thank you.
Okay, so, yeah.
So Dame Elizabeth Hatfield.
Just wondering how much research has been conducted with Black women, just with Black women. Somebody like myself, that the issue of fibroids turned out to be approached in a more positive way, was that when I was pregnant, the GP immediately thought, it was a very pleasant conversation, but she immediately thought I was 6 months pregnant because of the size of my abdomen, and was about to say, Elizabeth, I thought you would have come, oh, well, hold on, let's do, then she started, and of course, that's when I found out that I had fibroids. So, just from a personal point of view, I would love to hear, has any research been done with Black women about, there's so many aspects of research that could be looked into.
Yeah, so I think I'm just going to follow up with that question because of with that. Sorry, Hilary.
Thank you very much for that, because I think that putting together both the question from Dame Elizabeth, and I do want to highlight the really important points in the powerful personal story, Dawn, you shared, because you flagged points in your own personal history where there were opportunities where the very condition we're addressing today, uterine fibroids, could have been picked up. And so in terms of, so I'm aware of a study that was done in Black women in their mid-20s and mid-30s. 1 in 4 had uterine fibroids and had family histories. So screening is a very nuanced term, but we do have opportunity to identify earlier groups who may be at higher risk, and there should be flags for whoever they're going to see, that if you are in a certain group and you are young, and particularly if your periods are heavy, and this is where we need to educate about one's own personal experience and when it changes, where the opportunity to have an ultrasound scan, had it been offered earlier, would have detected earlier. Now that is not screening as such, it is enabling those who might be at higher risk to be identified earlier. And I think that is an important piece of education. I don't know whether that answered your question, but in our table discussion, and it came out in the room, is that research now should require, in the co-creation of that research question, the lived experience of those that the research question is addressing. And some funders have made that a requirement, but I think, you know, that is how we are going to involve advocacy and really hear, not for others to decide what it is that the individual wants to have addressed, but actually know that is what the person with fibroids wants to have answered.
Yeah, and actually,
how do we kind of make the voices of patients more heard and
Sorry, can you speak up?
to connect patients more with the educational, people kind of set up the education for practitioners and for young women and not only women, but so we should try to connect more person like you with patient advocacy with different aspects of society.
I think we've always said that we need to be in the rooms where these conversations are being had. So typically, if we're talking about any kind of gynecological issue, you will have the medical professionals just talking and we're not there. They are experts, they've gone to university, they've studied it, but we are experts by way of opinion, and we are real experts because we go away, we research highly, because we actually don't want to be living with this condition. So I've always said as well, it'd be great to have some sort of day or something where we can speak, just like how I shared portions of my story. And best believe I could speak about my story for a whole day, but where the doctors can really feel and resonate and see what we have gone through. I think they don't get that opportunity to really understand the suffering of these ladies and how it affects them on a day-to-day basis. Something I personally do to try and bridge the gap between doctors, medical professionals, and the patient, because there's such a distrust between the two, is I set up something on Instagram called My Fibroid Journey. And initially it was all about women coming on and speaking about their journey. I wanted to amplify their voices. Doctors saw me doing this and offered to help. So they'll step into the live as well and educate us on fibroids. So if you're seeing this wonderful doctor talking and he or she is showing that they actually care, that gap is closing. So the distrust is leaving. I feel as though I can go and see a doctor about my issues and my problems. So that's how we're trying.
We have a question from the audience.
Thank you. Sorry, just at the back over here. I have lots of thoughts and lots of opinions about everything that is being discussed, and I really appreciate the nuanced angle that we're looking at this from. I think it's very critical when talking about a topic that is so vastly affecting many women. So we have to keep that holistic eye on the matter. So I want to answer first, or give some small insight to Professor Dane Elizabeth's question about the research in Black women. So I am a Black woman, and I'm also a final year medical student with a keen interest in uterine fibroids, and just actually conducted something as simple as a literature review, which is something that's encouraged in medical school, get your hands involved in research. But my question actually stemmed from a smaller inspiration about screening. So I find it very interesting that these are the two things that have come up, because I think for the prevalence, and we don't need to go into the statistics speak for themselves, and something that is as prevalent as that warrants intervention in some kind of way. And if the way in which we've been doing things so far haven't been working, I think it necessitates the conversation of perhaps thinking about a different approach that can help to improve the experiences of these women. I won't go on my tangent. Let me try and stick to what I wanted to say. So in my literature review, I was asking a question about what was termed in the literature as age-specific incidence rates. So looking at what age do these women tend to have the diagnosis of fibroids occurring, and it was looking at it specifically in Afro-Caribbean females, because we know about the disproportionate effects, and there's literature out there to support that Black women get affected approximately 2 to 3 times more likely than women of other ethnic groups. And what was very, very striking in my simple task of doing a literature review is that from a grand total, from looking through the databases, there was a grand total of 3 publications that were significant for me to consider in looking at specifically age-specific incidence rates. So not looking at when the mean age at diagnosis is, but looking at what age do women develop this disease. Two of the papers were systematic reviews, and so they talked about a vast number of topics. I only included them in the literature review because they were quite scoping. One was specifically conducted in sub-Saharan Africa, and so provides that very nuanced perspective of the research that's currently going on the continent about this conversation. The authors were C. Adib Amowo, and I can't remember the other author. If anybody is interested, I do have the information. So 2 were systematic reviews, and so we're all a room of very intelligent people. That leaves us with a grand total of 1 research paper that looked into age-specific incidence rates of uterine fibroids, but there were great limitations to that research, to that publication. It was conducted in 2008, so we are currently in 2024. And even further to that, the conclusion that they landed on was that Black women develop disease approximately 5 to 6 years earlier than women of other ethnic groups. But what was most striking to me is that Black women made up 27% of the population of that study. And so in them representing such a small minority of the population group, they produced such a significant result, and that was to a p-value of 0.0001. So for our statisticians in the room, that's pretty certain that we're leading somewhere with this. And so I just wanted to provide that insight that the issue is the research is not being done. I will just flag back up to a conference that was conducted in the Norfolk and Norwich just earlier in the month, thanks to Dr. Roberta Hook, who's in the room, that focused on Black women's health specifically. And there was a very insightful talk by a young professor, Dr. Elsa Zakeng, I believe is her name, who raised a lot of questions about why, I think we can't disregard why there is that distrust of engagement in healthcare, particularly in the Black population group. And so we have to bear that in mind, and from the qualitative studies that she conducted, they landed on the take-home point that stated, is considering the history of healthcare and Black people, it's a tall ask to galvanize that trust. And it's something we have to bear in mind as we decide to move forward in health research, particularly in areas that disproportionately affect Black people. But I think this is where the work of the advocacy that you're doing, Dawn, I think is absolutely amazing. Because if we can, like you say, widen that gap of distrust and give the disproportionate groups the narratives that say, actually, I went to my doctor and instead of dismissing me, they actually referred me to gynecology. My gynecologist did this. All of the conversations that happen behind the scenes that have been happening for all of these years has led to conferences like this being occurring, will help in stepping over some of that burden and might increase the uptake of young and old Afro-Caribbean Black people in engaging in health and research. So I just wanted to add my small perspective to that.
Thank you for that. In the interest of time, I think we have to stop here. But I have one more question for Dr. Francesca Moore, because obviously she's here at Homerton, and actually we want to see this event going forward. So what are your last thoughts of what we can do to carry this conversation forward and to actually make a meaningful change?
Oh, thank you for that question. I really appreciate that. I think my first thought is that this type of interdisciplinary discussion joins the dots for us in new ways. And as an academic, I think that much of what I do is to synthesize information. But joining the dots in new ways is something that we don't always do. And I think the other thing that is really important for us is to think like activists. Homerton is a college where that is possible. And thinking like activists means being more agile. It means making the invisible visible. And it means asking the hard questions, having the difficult conversations. So I think this has been a really hopeful day. It's been a really interesting day. But I think what it's left us with is perhaps a different way of working together and working, we talked, David and I just talked about the role of digital activism. The role of digital activism, and we've just heard from Dawn about the role of social media in bringing together different voices, experts, patients, interested members of the public in new ways. So I think there's a recombinant innovation here that I'm really excited by. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesca. Okay, thank you very much. So we've come to an end of this event and discussion. But before we finish, I'm just going to invite Lord Woolley again to come and close this conversation.
Thank you. What a fabulous day of discussion, of empowerment, of learning, as a matter of fact. And this is everything that we want to do at Homerton College. We are a leading academic institution. But when you see a day like today, we fuse academia and research and put it all together for societal change. And when I look at this panel, the talent on one panel, Priscilla and your team, this is what you've done. You know, what gives me so much pride is when Priscilla came to my office. I kid you not, she has all this expertise, she has all this knowledge, she has all this passion, but she was nervous about being a leader. what I've seen with her and her colleagues is they've begun to step out of the shadows and say, acknowledge, I've got something to say, I've got something to do, and will I, as the principal, help them execute it? And today has been groundbreaking, Priscilla. And you have become a reluctant leader. And she's a nagger too. Simon, make sure you get West Street in here. Make sure because you're passionate about it. I look forward to seeing the next iteration of this conversation. So will your team come back onto the platform, please, all of you, and take the applause. Please. I think, and Mary, please, because you're part of this broader coalition, if you like, of researcher, scientist, and dare I say it, frankly, activist. That strain. That this happens at this college is no accident, by the way. Will you see more of this? Will you see more conversations about societal change in a whole range of areas? Yes, you will. This is what this great hall is for. This is how we inspire a generation of students to have the academic excellence, but to pivot from that to what do I do with it? How do I translate it for the great societal things that Mary Seacole did for our society? So thank you all. I look forward to the next conference. Are we going bigger? We're going bigger. We're going to lobby the politicians. We'll get West Street in here, I promise you, and the others. Give them all a round of applause. Thank you all very much. Okay. I think we've got drinks now, drinks and snacks. I think our photographer wants our dynamic women for a picture. So over to you. Thank you.
Can I just say one more word as well, actually? Thank you so much, Simon, and your team as well, actually, for helping us to run this event and for all the funding Homerton provided, actually, because this would never have been possible, actually, if Homerton didn't allow it to happen, but also fund it. So thank you so much. Thank you, Francesca. Thank you, Mary, for all your support. And Robin is not here. And Lester, thank you so much for everything. I am sorry, I'm not going to nag you anymore, so thank you very much.
We would like to thank all the speakers for being here with us today and the panelists as well. And please help yourself with some drinks at the back of the room. Go ahead. Probably the acknowledgements. Oh, okay. Okay, here we go.